The Blue Cliff Record, case 26. A monk asked Hyakujo, "What is the most wondrous experience in Zen?" Hyakujo replied, "Sitting alone on the peak of a sacred mountain." The monk gave a little smile and bowed deeply. As he got up, Hyakujo smacked him upside the head. I have said that inevitably everyone comes to practice for the wrong reasons. But that's not a bad thing. That's what practice is. It's to help us be clear about all our wrong reasons, all our curative fantasies and gaining ideas. We need a screen on which to display them and see them clearly. So as long as they remain unconscious, we're going to remain in their grip. So we can say that's what Hyakujo is offering to the monk in this story. The monk comes asking about wondrous experiences in Zen practice. He's in search of those experiences. He thinks those experiences are the point of practice, to achieve some special state of consciousness, some transformative insight. So Hyakujo joins the fantasy for a moment. It says, well, if you're asking about wondrous experiences, to be deep in samadhi, to feel like you're at the top of a mountain all alone, simply immersed in the bliss of your own consciousness. That's the most wonderful possible experience, right? And in a sense, it's just what the monk wants to hear. This is the carrot he's been chasing. Hyakujo seems to confirm it for him. And yet as he bows at the end of the encounter, Hyakujo hits him, as if to knock that idea right out of his head. He says, yes, indeed, there are wondrous experiences. But if you think that's the point, you've missed the whole point of practice. The monk in this koan does not have a name, and the koan doesn't end with, and then the monk was enlightened. He apparently needed many more slaps upside the head to disabuse him of his curative fantasies. It is interesting, though, that the teacher of this story is Hyakujo. I mean, in some sense, it's a kind of lesson you can imagine many teachers giving. But Hyakujo in particular is the teacher who is said to have formulated the monastic life in China for the monks who had originally been part of a Indian tradition where monks did not work, but lived by alms. But Hyakujo reordered the Sangha to say that the monks shouldn't be beggars, they should be workers. They should live the ordinary life of other simple people. They should become subsistence farmers, grow their own food. And while none of these monasteries were immune from patronage, basically they should be self-sufficient. And Hyakujo is known for the saying, a day without work is a day without eating. He wanted to bring the monks' lives off that solitary peak of contemplation. He said the business of Zen is not something that's going on privately in between your ears, developing special states of consciousness or insight, but it's inseparable from this whole form of life, of living communally, working, paying attention to the everyday things of life. How your food is grown, how it's prepared, how it's cleaned up. All these things are our practice, not just our zazen. And I think it's important that in the monk's fantasy, Hyakujo's first answer, there's a kind of picture of solitude, of being all alone on the mountain peak. This is equivalent to being all immersed in your private experience, your private inner consciousness. Yet the thrust of Hyakujo's reformation was to emphasize we're not doing this alone. It's not a practice of hermits. It's a communal practice. It's something we're doing together. Now, ironically, as I talked to you this morning, my wife has hired a couple local workers to be outside digging holes and planting trees. So I'm sitting here doing zazen and talking to you while these people are out doing all this real work. Hyakujo might give me a slap upside the head if you saw that. And yet I think what we have learned is that we can no more romanticize the life of simple labor than we can romanticize sitting alone at the top of a sacred peak. Certainly that we've gone through phases in American Zen where work practice was fetishized just as much as samadhi. That the whole idea of we've got to get people outside of their heads, into their bodies, get them doing manual labor, washing the dishes, mopping the floors. And I remember a woman asking me about a sesshin I did many years ago, and I told her how much of the time was spent cleaning. And she said, I've got 2 kids at home. I don't need to go away for a weekend to wash pots and clean the floor. And I do think that there was, on one hand, a way in which all that work practice did give many of us a kind of new respect for paying attention to the ordinary chores of daily life, to see making your bed and washing the dishes and cooking and cleaning as your practice. To paying attention to these things is as much practice as doing mu. But it's also the case that drudgery and mindless work in a monastery can be just as soul deadening as if it's done in a factory. And that there's nothing necessarily enlightening about doing manual labor all day. We have to learn to practice with our work. But that woman with her 2 kids needed time off from her work. She needed a time of silence, contemplation, and peace, as much as she needed the sleep she wasn't getting at night. These are part of a healthy life that can be squashed by too much labor, too many chores, whether in a family or in a monastery. So as usual, there are 2 ditches on the side of the road. We can lose ourselves in contemplation, in the cultivation of special inner states, or we can romanticize the life of a simple peasant, as if that is the way to be close to nature, be in our bodies, and be romantically disregarding the pain and drudgery and dangers involved in the life of people who actually have to do that work full time for subsistence. And playing at it for a few hours in a sesshin is something else entirely. I think the beginning of sesshin this morning, I said, sesshin is a wonderful opportunity. What kind of opportunity is it? In the koan, we hear of the monk who thinks it's an opportunity to have wonderful experiences. And there's a way in which that is true. And in a sense, it would be a shame if we never had any of them. If we didn't allow ourselves to sink into the quiet and to allow our minds to quiet down and experience the peace and the joy that's possible. Sometimes we need that kind of respite from the turmoil of our everyday life and our everyday thoughts. I don't begrudge anybody the opportunity to find that kind of peace. But in a way that's like working all year to be able to go on vacation. The vacation may be wonderful, but it's not where we live. And we can't live that way 52 weeks a year. What we need is to discover something on that vacation that we actually bring back, that transforms the way we live and we work, so that attention and quiet and peace become integrated into our lives, not become retreats from our lives. And Joko, of course, never liked to use the word retreat as a synonym for sesshin. She always spoke of sesshin as an intensive, as an opportunity to push ourselves to our limits, but really meaning pushing our curative fantasies to their limits, whether it's in the pursuit of a wondrous experience or the pursuit of the kind of macho endurance that was sometimes cultivated in sesshins back in those days. That sense of, I can handle anything, just bring it on. If we're asked, what is the most wondrous experience in Zen? It's perhaps become something of a Zen cliche to just answer, oh, the experience of this moment, whatever it is. What's the most wondrous place? Place I'm in right now. We can all say that, but it's hard to really mean that. It becomes again a kind of cliche of just be the present moment. Well, most of us turn out to be a little fussy about the moment we're willing to be one with. And it's more important to be honest about that particular fussiness, about what we judge and what we reject and what we're trying to control, than it is to try to lull ourselves into thinking we're just being this moment. I think we do that sometimes when we talk about just sitting. We're lulling ourselves into a kind of complacency about just leaving everything alone as it is, which is a way of denying our own unconscious, which is trying to talk ourselves into a level of acceptance or equanimity that imagines we can more or less predict what's going to happen next. We've been here, we've done that, we know what sitting is like. Perhaps the most wondrous thing is the thing that we can't anticipate, the thing that we don't control, the thing that actually surprises us in our sitting. And at a certain level, nobody, myself included, really wants to be surprised by what bubbles up out of our mind, what bubbles up out of our body in the way of sudden pain or tension or sickness or the signs of old age. And yet it's all of these. And our opportunity to transform our relationship to them that may turn out to be the most wondrous experience in Zen.